tell us a little bit about the economics. I heard you speak at the chamber event very recently, and thought you did a wonderful job, by the way, in
Thank you, sir.
framing, analyzing really where the economy's going. I thought the speakers were fantastic. Can you just talk a little bit more about the things that you were talking about in terms of where Rocky Mount stands? The recession, does it come? Does it not come? What's the impact going to be for the city, residents of the city? And what are the things that maybe the city ought to do to prepare for that?
Yes, sir, absolutely, and thank you for having me.
Sure.
And what I would say is, first of all, the event that we did, the Economic Summit, which is actually put on by the Chamber of Commerce here, the Rocky Mount Area
Mhm.
Chamber of Commerce. I'm very fortunate that David Ferris gives me the opportunity to
Right.
kind of build an event for this in Rocky Mount. We were able to assemble a great group that not only had a national economist in Gus Foucher, that also had a more North Carolina focused economist in Mushin Gutabi from UNC Wilmington. And obviously, we also had Norris Tolson there from Gateway Partnership. We had Susan Phelps there from Nash County. And we also, of course, had Secretary Saunders there as well, who participated via remote. And one of her assistant secretaries, Ken Rogers, I believe is his name,
Okay.
was there. And they were able to provide a lot of information to the public. And to kind of start off with, in terms of what Gus Foucher and Mushin Gutabi talked about, is they were able to really show kind of where we are, which is that, and you know this pretty well from the business perspective and also as mayor, that we are seeing some very odd situations in our current economy. In some ways, things are going very well. Businesses are seeing growth. There are certain aspects of the economy that are performing in a positive direction. And then there are some other things that are not going so well. We obviously have considerable inflation, which was to be expected due to what we needed to do from a policy perspective with in the aftermath of COVID and during COVID, and some other decisions that had to be made. And of course, that inflation has to be solved, and it leads to other trade-offs, such as what's going on currently in the housing market and also in the debt markets and those type of things due to the higher interest rates. So there were a lot of things that are going on. And of course, one of the things that was really pointed out is, of course, that there is this disconnect that exists in how consumers feel about the economy versus what they're actually doing. And the prime example of that is, up until very, very recently, actually November, consumer spending was continuing to go up. And some of that was due to inflation, but some of it was also just due to behavior. While at the same time, consumer sentiment, when they actually were asking them survey questions, was going down. So there was a disconnect. And finally, not to our joy, but certainly makes more sense. We found out that in November that we actually saw consumer spending go down a little bit. And it will be interesting here in a couple of days to see where December's consumer spending was. Obviously, it's the holiday season, so it probably picked up. But then the question is, what does it look like compared to last year? What does it look like compared to what the expectations were for the end of the year? And so I think the message that was presented during that summit is, it is likely at a national level that we are going to see a recession.
Mhm.
Some people would say we're already in a recession based on how you looked at GDP numbers, based on how you look at things over the past year. The question is, what kind of recession will it be? And for some people, there's kind of that immediate thought. You look back at what happened in 2020, you look back at what happened in 2008, 2009, and that, of course, kind of fixes how you think a recession is going to be. And of course, if you go further back, you look at what happened in the 90s, you look back at what happened in the 80s, there were recessions, but they were more mild. You
Mhm.
didn't have as significant of a drop economically. So I have the tendency to believe that this recession that either we are in currently or that we are about to enter is going to be a mild recession at a national level. What I also want to say is that recessions are not felt the same everywhere in the country or even everywhere in a particular state. So, what we have started noticing here locally, and this was communicated more so by Susan and also by Norris, is that we are seeing noticeable signs of economic growth that are not as much tied to national trends. They are also tied to the fact that we're starting to see the influx of economic opportunity from the Triangle region. This is something that I imagine a lot of people have been waiting a long time to see. It's
Been
been
hearing about it all my life, right?
exactly,
And
exactly.
how old am I?
Yeah, it was coming at some point,
Right.
and it only makes sense for it to now come because they've
Sure.
pretty much gone everywhere they can, north, south, and west.
Well, and
So,
I'll just add too, we're the ninth most populous state in the union,
Mhm.
and we're the fourth fastest growing state in the country right now.
Right,
And so when you look at that, that creates a lot of tailwind.
it
And
does.
it does ease a lot of recession types of fears from a holistic global perspective. However, we start talking about specific to our community with a fairly low median household income, the impact of increasing prices, of course, is a challenge. And I didn't mean to take you off rail there, but
No, you hit it on the head. It's an opportunity that has to be responded to in many different ways because opportunities create challenges just as much challenges create
that's right.
opportunities.
That's
And
right.
you have to look at what's going on. You have to learn from what's happened in other parts of the country or especially other parts of the state when similar activities have happened. But the reality is, and you know this pretty well, and I think most people do, is that in the modern world, economic growth is primarily driven by inward migration.
Hmm.
Birth rates are relatively low nationwide and globally in the industrialized world, and so your ability to grow your economic base, which is primarily based on how many people you have there and how much you produce per capita, is driven largely by your population, and you have to grow that by bringing people into your area. And you talk about North Carolina being the fourth largest, Florida, of course, being the largest.
Right.
You
Texas,
see
Arizona, around that top four.
exactly, and you see those places because of that population growth, and of course, and then you look in North Carolina and the Triangle, Charlotte. You look at Asheville. You look at these areas that have just seen massive growth at an even higher scale than the state average, and you see how that generates economic activity.
Mm.
And so for us, it has that potential. And we've seen that to some degree in the fact that we've seen business development, particularly from a retail commercial perspective. We will see it industrially. And Norris is, of course, the best person in the area
Right.
to talk about that. And then, of course, obviously, it does affect the housing market. And it's not just from the standpoint of single family housing. We do need to catch up on building new housing, whether it's affordable housing. Obviously, that is the top priority of City Council, and it's a top priority of us at staff. There's also the need to grow market rate housing. And we also have seen, and I've noticed this as well, is that you're also seeing turnover in the multifamily housing market here in our area. There's a company that established itself in the last year that's bought 2 apartment complexes in Rocky Mount in the last 6 months. And that, of course, is going to have a noticeable impact because they're going to be improvements. And at the same time, there is the possibility for trade-offs. And so you have that. You have the development of the Sunset Avenue interchange for I-95, which is going to have noticeable impact in that particular area. And that's where I live, so I
Right,
kind
sure.
of realize that. And you have all these other things that are going on that are starting to link us closer to what's going on in the Triangle. And obviously, the growth and development that's happening to the west of us in Nash County, the opportunity for growth to the east of us in Edgecombe County, and we have to we want to encourage it. We definitely want to welcome it, and at the same time, we have to be prepared to respond to it and make the necessary adjustments or the next necessary actions and initiatives to be able to help those residents who are here, whether it being with housing affordability, workforce development, whatever the case may be. We have to provide that assistance because what we don't want, and I don't think any of us want, is to see a situation like what does happen in other parts of the country and even here in North Carolina, where yes, there is growth and development at a macro level, but you go into the neighborhoods, and particularly those neighborhoods that have residents who've lived all their lives here, or certainly long periods of time, and not only are they not seeing the growth, it's actually hurting them, and that's what we want to try to avoid. And that is a challenge that you and that the council have in terms of figuring out what to do about that. And then we as staff trying to do our part to learn from what's going on elsewhere, see what opportunities are out there to make improvements, and then from time to time exercise some creativity and kind of thinking about what we can do to make everything work out.
Sure. Well, I mean, look, just about housing alone, we have just a scarcity of housing, period.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, what is it? Last time I checked, I talked to a couple folks in the rental business, 96% of all rental units are occupied right now. I mean, that's virtually full.
Yes.
I mean, 4% turnover. And you look at houses for sale in the MLS, it's been as low as 50. I think it's now somewhere in the 200-300 range, which is still very, very low considering all the units that we have out there. I am excited to see some new developments beginning to start here in Rocky Mount, but we can't grow without that. So, and then juxtapose that with, existing housing that we have, folks on fixed income with the current inflationary rates, people get priced out of housing
right
without any improvement, any of this, I guess we'll call it gentrification, but without any of those factors in play, we still run the risk. So the question that I'm always worried about, and you're not looking for necessarily an answer, but one of the things that I always wake up in the morning trying to figure out is how do we help this population? About 5.9% of our population is unemployed.
Mm-hmm.
How do we help that population find some of the jobs that exist here in the community? And there are about 1,500, 1,600 jobs that I'm aware of that people need to be filled. How do you bridge that gap through workforce training and through other mechanisms?
I think the question, we do need to do the best job we can, and we're not obviously going to be able to solve it for every single person. What we need to do, however, and I think this is kind of where we have to look at it a little differently, because traditionally when we talk about issues like workforce development, it's a top-down approach.
Mm-hmm.
You get a bunch of people in a room, you start, and of course these people represent a variety of groups. They have a lot of experience, and they try to figure out a solution. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with that, but the reality is that when something doesn't make sense, like what we're dealing with right now, where we have a significant number of jobs available and we have still a high unemployment rate compared to most other parts of the state, definitely.
Actually, we're the highest metro, last report I saw.
And we have been for a pretty long time. The reality is that something else must not be working. And obviously the training aspect is important.
Mm-hmm.
We have to look at that from the perspective of what's going on in terms of the population that is unemployed. Who are they? We need to better understand who they are, what their experiences are, and where they currently stand as compared to where they need to be to really take advantage of these opportunities. And education is part of that. We have to accept the fact that we have not necessarily in this region done what we need to do to address basic education for many years, for generations at this point. And that's going to, and I'm not
stop there. I mean, when I was a kid, Rocky Mount had its own school system, and I'm certainly not proposing that we try to go back into this again. I don't know that we could afford to do it, honestly, but that was the drawing card. People wanted to live in the city limits because that particular school system was demonstrating a greater success than those systems around it.
Right.
And so as a result, people wanted to move into the city of Rocky Mount just to be able to participate in that. Well, I point that out because I think many people listening to this will remember those days. That is an economic driver. What we provide in terms of education is an economic driver. It creates opportunity for those. It levels the playing field for everybody.
Right.
If you have the opportunity to participate. And second of all, it is an economic driver by itself. But, I don't want to go too far. You and I were sitting in, I'll call it a think tank meeting.
Yes,
at
we were.
Gateway's partnership. And this was one of the topics that this really was the core of it, right?
Yes, it was.
How do we, and you had some great observations, I thought, in terms of both looking at job descriptions and maybe changing what that looks like in terms of requirements, in terms of embracing wraparound services in education.
Mm-hmm.
There were a number of things that were brought up, and I thought you made some great points in that particular meeting. And so, if you share some of those with us, that'd be great.
Well, and I speak not only, as you know, in my life outside the city.
Sure.
I'm an educator. I've
That's
been
right.
teaching at the graduate level at NC State for a couple of years now. I came from a family of teachers, and I'm also the parent of a school-age child.
Right.
My child is a freshman in high school at this point. And I've looked at this kind of externally because as a city employee, my ability to participate in certain things is limited,
Sure.
as it should be. So I see just there are some things that concern me, and that the real issue to me is cultural.
Mhm.
And I would say this across our region, regardless of income levels, regardless of race, regardless of anything,
Mhm.
is that when you go to other parts of the state like Raleigh or Charlotte or Asheville or Wilmington, and you go to other parts of the country in areas that are considered metropolitan areas, and I would even say this is a place like Hickory,
Right.
which is kind of our comparison to
It
the
is.
West. You have a culture there where that reminds me more of my childhood. I kind of grew up in a micropolitan area in Tennessee,
Okay.
halfway between Nashville and Knoxville. And we happened to be be home to a university, but once you left the university and the city, you were out in the fields and the farmland. And we still had this kind of mentality that I see in these other areas of the state that I've just mentioned, where that everybody, regardless of their background and regardless of their formal education, still embraces a culture of learning.
Mhm.
Both of my grandfathers really didn't have that much formal education. One of them was an 8th grade dropout who had to drop out to support his family.
Sure.
Not
Not an uncommon story,
right.
actually,
No, it
in that
wasn't.
particular generation.
Exactly. And my other one, he graduated high school, but basically because he did work around the school as opposed
Right.
to, he was not a classroom guy.
Right.
But both of them in their own way were constantly studying, constantly learning, constantly reading. They built their careers based on not only their work ethic, both of them had amazing work ethics, but it was also their ability to learn
Mhm.
and to study. And it could be about anything. And as a result, they were successful. There was an understanding that yes, formal education is important. And my dad was the first in his family to go to college. Both my sisters and I ended up getting advanced degrees. That was very important to my entire family, including those members of the family who barely graduated high school. And the reality is that that cultural mentality, I don't see as much here.
Mhm.
Instead of that idea of embracing knowledge, embracing that kind of education or academic style, that kind of informal or formal improvement,
Sure.
you don't see it really stressed at a cultural level in our region. And that can be anybody.
Sure, I
Again,
understand.
I'm not saying, the kids, my daughter goes to a school I'll be honest, she goes to a private school here in
Sure.
town. And I even know of students there that to them is just kind of something that they're doing until they graduate, and then they'll do whatever,
Because somebody told you I had to.
Exactly. So it's not just limited to people. Again, it's across the
No, I
board.
understand.
And I don't see what we need to have in order for all of us to be prepared for the challenges that are coming forward. Because when I look at it this way, and even in my own professional career, each day I not only have to do what I'm doing to meet the needs of today, do my work,
Right.
I also have to do whatever I need to prepare for tomorrow. Because in your industry and in a lot of industries out there, changes have happened instantaneously in a matter, whether it's the advent of new technologies,
Sure.
processes, research findings, whatever the case may be, everything changes a lot faster than the actual change itself is a lot faster than we give it credit. And so that mentality is not there.
Right.
And until we kind of build that culture, which is not something necessarily the city council can do or county commission. It's
we're not owning it, by the way.
No, but I'm just saying it's not the easiest thing in the world to do.
No.
And we need to move in that direction. Then of course you go from there, and then you look at the child care issue, which a lot of families have, the elder care issue, which is a big issue in our region.
Sure. Transportation.
There are some other facets that do create impediments and barriers for these individuals to be able to take advantage of these opportunities. And what we also know is that COVID itself, the pandemic itself, and I appreciate that we kind of did not have the same policy response at a statewide level that other states did, where they locked down for extended periods of
Right.
time. We kind of were in that medium between what Florida and Texas
I
did
thought it was
and what New
managed
York
well.
and what New York and California did. And so we were in the middle. And so that worked to our advantage. And here in this area, we kind of stuck with that. We didn't go further. Other parts of the state did, but we didn't. And the reality is that even taking that out of the equation, the mental effect of what was going on and how it did have an effect on people. And it still has that effect, whether it's those who are suffering from ongoing symptoms or ongoing illnesses due to their exposure to COVID, or it's people who have a natural concern and they're more risk averse as a result of how COVID has been presented.
Right.
It creates challenges for them as well. And we have to work on that because we have to understand we have overall an older population than the state average. We have we of course do have those issues with education that I talked about, and we have a lot of families who have a lot of needs. And during the ARP meetings, we had one particular town hall where we had a pastor come, and he talked about, he was a pastor whose church kind of has its own daycare operation. And he talked about that this was a serious issue for his congregants because they could do some at their operation, but they had other congregants who needed to find other services and they couldn't find them.
Right.
And I mean, that can even be a case for it's a case both for professional workers and those that work in other trades, that all of them struggle with that. And we need to work with that. So I would say those three areas, the education, childcare, and also childcare and elder care, as well as transportation, those are the three things we're really going to have to address. And then the last thing I would say is we need for our employers to understand that the world has changed and they need to adapt to it. Some of them are. We are certainly trying our best at the city, and we still struggle with that. And that's everybody's struggling with it. But we have employers. There are employers here, and there's nothing against them. They simply need to understand that the world is changing and that they need to be able to adapt their practices to more meet the needs of the workers that they want to hire and have that understanding.
I think you're right. And one of the things I'm seeing as a result of all these factors, more and more and more, is this notion again, or embracement, I should say, that, 4-year college education is not necessarily where we need to be. A trade can be invaluable. And if you find an employer who's willing to work with you and constantly educate you, and you're willing to do that and have that work ethic, you really, literally, the sky is the limit. That can be an absolute career path, enriching you. And it may not be with that same employer that you start with. You may switch jobs a couple of times, but it's creating those opportunities for you.
It is. And like, for example, there are some things other states are doing. Texas and Tennessee have already done this. And in that, they've made community college free.
Right.
For high school graduates and for adults. And like my alma mater actually is taking it a step further this coming year in that they will offer additional scholarships, not full rides, but additional scholarships as part of a transfer program. So if you decide to do a 2-year degree and you decide after that 2-year degree, you know what, I do want to go get a 4-year degree, like someone going into a nursing program or somebody going into a technical program decides, you know what, it would be more beneficial for me to get the 4-year degree that's an extension of this. They are offering scholarships for that. But that's kind of a later practice. But by realizing, and I understand that there's a lot of different debates about free 4-year education, making everything free until the end. There's certainly issues there, but we can look at the state level, especially now because we realize at a statewide level that community college enrollment has gone down, and there are some challenges in there that we can. I do think that the legislature, the governor, and state agencies need to look at it and say, is this really a desirable option? Because if the need is there statewide, shouldn't we take a look at this? Obviously, they're going to want to look at some things in the coming 2 years, but this may be something that they want to add to that evaluation.
I think that's right. I've even heard the notion of let's ditch this notion of a 4-year degree for anything. I mean, it's important, but let's talk about it maybe in smaller units. Maybe it's 12 hours at a time to change my skill set or to enhance a skill that I have or to modify it. And it's really for an ongoing, continuous learning experience versus, I'm going to go start as a freshman, complete my studies as a senior, and then I'm going to start over, either go to grad school or I'm going to start a career. I will say one thing, though, that I believe the city is doing well, or we've been fortunate to, is that with partnering with MetroNet and this notion of creating a fiber optic network throughout the city, because I really see that as now the corner of Main and Main.
Yes.
And it really does allow anybody who can tap in to participate in a whole nother world, whether it looks like education, whether it looks like jobs. In many cases, there's some jobs you can't replace, on present location, but many you can. And so I think we're scheduled for a update on that in the next meeting or two. So I'm kind of excited to hear what they're going to say.
So what I can tell you, because I can kind of preface it a little bit because they're coming up very soon, is that they are looking to get started in probably sometime in the spring. I'm not going to say exactly when, but because they're working out. It is going to be a massive project. People will see it. It will encompass the city. It will be done in phases. We have a good team that they've assembled that's working with them. Our departments are working with them. We already, of course, had a pole attachment agreement that was approved by council a couple of months ago. There may be some additional things that we need to bring forth to council. Of course, as you know, we kind of have to take a hands-off approach in a lot of ways because of state law, and that's a challenge because we're kind of behind on that. And that's not due to anything that the city's done or its residents have done. It was because there were some decisions made at the state level back in 2011 that they said, well, we want to go in this direction. And granted, they didn't think COVID would happen. Nobody did. But when you have an event like COVID that makes us realize that if you're going to try to provide distant services, and that being the way of the future, that the infrastructure has to be there. What we have to do is work with them to see what we can get done that enables the build-outs to be as inclusive and equitable as possible for our residents throughout the city. And we're working with that as well.
And I'm excited about that. And let's just, we started this conversation about you have to keep your head on a swivel. Things are changing so fast. You got to constantly be able to adapt, and things are moving very fast. Just think about the technology changes that have occurred in the last 11 years, from 2011, and we'll call it that time order bill, to 2022 in terms of technology, speeds, internet, the capacity, the things that we have at our discretion or at our fingertips. Wow, what a big difference. And so laws, a lot of times, just have to trail that. Well, look, we've run out of time, but look, I appreciate you coming and giving us your thoughts on the economy in terms of where we are and maybe some economic development things that we don't think of in traditional ways. And, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Greatly appreciate it.